In the last video, we were trying to do input validation for two things in the same code. We were asking the user for a number, and we wanted to keep asking if the number was invalid. And then we were also asking the user to enter a valid file name, and if the name was not valid, we wanted to keep asking. So what we tried doing in the last video was try to have two while loops inside, and that was not working with the try-catch. To get it to work with the try-catch, what I did was I created two booleans outside, one for the number case and one for the file case, and I set them both to true because at the beginning I want to force the code to ask for a number and ask for a file. So I assume I'm kind of like pretending that they failed. So I'm setting them to true that they failed to force the code to ask for them. And now my while loop, because it's validating two things, I'm putting both variables. So as long as one of them failed, I'm going to keep going in and asking again. So my try catch is going to be inside the while loop because I want to be catching the exceptions inside the while. As long as things are failing, I want to be catching. So the first validation that I have is the number validation. So I check here. If I'm here because the number failed, then I'm going to ask for a number. And if something happens, it's going to go throw an exception. But if everything is good, it's going to set number failed to false. And so this code will never get executed again if number field was set to false. And then my other part of the code was for the file validation. If it failed, then I will, the file field will be true and it will keep asking. So let's run it and test it to make sure that it's working. And so here when I try to enter like a bad number, let's say 10, 10 again, 2, as long as I'm asking for a bad number, I'm entering a bad number, something that's not a number, it keeps, throwing the exception. It keeps catching the exception and telling me that it's invalid. But once I enter a good number, now this one stops and it goes to the file. And again, the file, as long as I enter something bad, it's going to keep telling me until I enter a good file and then it finishes. Now, while I was writing this code and testing it out, I ran into a weird issue. And it took me a while to figure it out, so I want to kind of share it with you. Here, my scanner, I'm creating the scanner many, many times inside my while loop, and I thought, why am I doing that? That's not a good idea. My scanner should be only created one time. So what I did was I took the scanner and I created it outside. I moved it outside, and then I ran this code, and I gave it, 10 to test it, and I ran into an infinite loop. And it took me a while to figure out what was going on. But if we start looking at the error messages with the code, let's kind of look at it. I created my scanner, and it said at the beginning, enter a number. I'm probably not gonna, it's there, enter a number. So it came, enter a number. And then it tried reading in the next int, which was the word 10. And so it tried reading it in. It couldn't read it in because it was not a number. So it went into the try and catch, and it found that it got an input mismatch exception. So it printed the message, not a number. And then it went into the finally clause because we said finally gets executed whether you run into an exception or not. Here we did run into an exception, so it said done executing. And then it came to the while, so it's going to wrap around and come back to the while, and it's going to check again if number failed or file failed. And yes, in this case, both of them are still failing. So it's going to come back and try doing, it's checking is number failed. Yes, it is, because we never set it to false because that line never got reached, line 40. And it's asking enter a number again, and it's saying enter a number, and it's trying to read the number, but it's not waiting for me to read a number, to type in anything. It's not waiting for me. Looks like it found something to read. What did it find to read? It found the word 10 again. Why? Because next int goes and tries to read in the next int. If it finds something that's not an int, it doesn't read it. And so that 10 is still sitting there waiting for someone to read it. And because it's there, it's giving me this infinite loop. And so to fix it, what we really need to do is to read in the 10. So how can we force it to read in the 10? Next int is not going to force it to read. So what we can do instead is create a variable string, and let's create it up here so we can actually use it later. Let's call it value. And what we can do is here say value equal to k dot next. So I want to read something. I will just read the next string that's there, whatever it is. And now instead of using k equal next int, I can't do that. You know, I could. Well, actually, let's do that. Here, sorry, I can't do that because I already read it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use the integer dot parse int to parse the value into a number. And now this, of course, is going to fail. And when we run it and it fails, we'll find that it's another exception. So now it's telling me that, you know, it ran into an error for input 10. So here there's another exception that's being thrown, and we really need to know, we want to know what the exception is. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to temporarily comment out my exception code so I know what the exception being thrown is. Okay. So let's comment that out. Need to comment out the try. So let's comment out the try also. Let's run it again. And now the exception is number format exception. So this is the exception that we're running into now. Number format exception. So the integer.parseInt, coming from integer.parseInt, doesn't throw an input mismatch exception. That comes from the scanner. This one's throwing a number format exception. So I'm going to come back down here and I'm going to say if it's an input mismatch exception, or EX is an instance of number format exception. I'm going to fix this, not a number. Here now I have the string, so I can just say the value. And let's put our code back so that we can test it all together. Back up and comment out my catch. And I'm going to uncomment my try. And now let's run it and see if this fixes the issue that we were running into, the infinite loop. So if I say 10, now it's allowing me to enter another number, and the file the same until I enter a good one, it goes away. So this is a problem that I ran into because the scanner, when it's inside the while loop, every time you create a new scanner, you're actually looking at new input, and whatever was typed with the old scanner you don't see. But once I moved the scanner out, the 10 was sticking there, and the reason was that next int doesn't read. If it finds something that's not a number, it's not going to read it. It throws an exception and doesn't read it, and that word 10, T-E-N, remained in the buffer, and that was causing this exception to happen. But this code is going to be on Blackboard, so you can see it as an example for when you want to do input validation with exceptions.